During World War II, amidst countless tales of unsung heroes, one woman stood out, so much so that the entire Gestapo intelligence network was relentlessly trying, and failing, to hunt her down, with a bounty of 5 million francs placed on her head, dead or alive. Nancy Wake was far more than just a spy. She was a ghost in the night, a nightmare etched into the minds of German soldiers. She once took down an SS officer with her bare hands, a feat that left both allies and enemies in stunned fear. One of her fellow resistance fighters once said, "She was the most feminine woman I'd ever known, until the shooting started." So who was Nancy Wake? Born in 1912 in New Zealand, Nancy Wake moved to Australia as a young child. Her early years were far from easy. She grew up in poverty. But from an early age, she showed an unmistakable thirst for adventure. At just 16 years old, after inheriting £200, a substantial amount at the time, Wake left her family behind to see the world. After traveling to New York and London, she eventually settled in Paris, where she worked as a freelance journalist. During the 1930s, she spent time living in Vienna, where she witnessed firsthand the brutal and inhumane treatment of Jews under the rising tide of fascism. The trauma of those experiences planted in her a deep and lasting hatred for Nazi ideology, a hatred that would later fuel her unwavering commitment to resistance. In 1936, she married Henri Fiocca, a wealthy French businessman, and together they made their home in the city of Marseille. Their life was one of elegance and social prestige, filled with lavish parties and high society connections. But that peace was short-lived. When Nazi Germany invaded France in 1940, Nancy Wake refused to sit idly by. In contrast to the image of women during that era, expected only to wave their husbands off to war and knit scarves in quiet support, Wake declared, "I don't see why women should stay out of the war when the enemy is destroying everything." At first, she volunteered as an ambulance driver, helping transport the wounded. But after France fell in just 6 weeks of feeble resistance, Wake turned to a far more dangerous front, the underground resistance. While official military resistance had collapsed, covert networks began to thrive, operating in secret all across the country. These groups carried out high-risk missions, espionage, sabotage, assassinations, and disruption of German supply lines and communications. Nancy Wake became involved with one of the largest and most effective resistance escape routes, the Pat O'Leary Line. Named after the alias of its leader, Albert Garies, this network specialized in helping Allied soldiers who had been shot down behind enemy lines or French citizens targeted by the Nazis to escape from occupied France. After the war, it's estimated that over 7,000 people reached safety through this line and its branches. But Wake and her husband were more than just supporters. They used their apartment as a safe house, a sanctuary for soldiers, pilots, and couriers. It also served as a key node for transferring documents, food, and funds to resistance cells scattered throughout the country. Their wealth and elite status allowed them to move more freely than most, enabling them to build crucial links between otherwise isolated groups. It was during this period that the Gestapo began to take notice of Nancy Wake. But despite the extensive surveillance network surrounding her and the massive bounty placed on her head, she always managed to vanish before they could catch her. That's how she earned the nickname, White Mouse, a symbol of her uncanny ability to slip through the cracks, survive impossible odds, and strike back when least expected. The Gestapo grew increasingly frustrated, but Wake repeatedly escaped their grasp. She became a living legend among the French resistance, and the #1 target of the Nazi intelligence machine. Although she was a master at evading Gestapo raids, Nancy Wake's luck eventually ran out. During one ambush, she fell into the hands of German intelligence agents. After being captured, she endured 4 straight days and nights of intense interrogation under immense psychological pressure and constant threats. Yet despite the relentless questioning, Wake stayed strong and refused to reveal anything about the structure or scale of the resistance network, and, most critically, she never exposed her true identity. In a bold and dramatic rescue operation, one of Wake's fellow resistance operatives, none other than the leader of the Pat O'Leary escape line, devised an audacious plan. Disguising himself as an officer in the Vichy French militia, he infiltrated the prison where Wake was being held and claimed she was his mistress. He demanded her immediate release. caught off guard and unsure of how to respond. The Gestapo guards hesitated, and ultimately complied, unknowingly freeing the most wanted woman in all of France. Despite her cleverness and resourcefulness, Wake couldn't ignore the reality that the Gestapo was tightening its net. By 1943, the Nazi crackdowns grew more aggressive and brutal. When the Pat O'Leary line was betrayed, many resistance members were exposed and arrested. Wake was forced to make a heart-wrenching decision. She had to flee France, leaving behind her beloved husband. Henri Fiocca. Fiocca was captured by the Gestapo shortly afterward. He was tortured mercilessly in an attempt to extract information about Wake's whereabouts. But he refused to betray her. His unwavering loyalty ultimately cost him his life. Wake wouldn't learn of his execution until France was liberated in 1944, a devastating blow she carried with quiet grief. During her escape, Wake crossed the treacherous Pyrenees Mountains into Spain, an arduous and dangerous journey, and eventually made her way to England. But instead of lying low, she immediately took action. She approached the Special Operations Executive, SOE, Britain's elite intelligence agency, which specialized in training and deploying agents into occupied territories for sabotage, espionage, and coordination with local resistance movements. Throughout her training with the SOE, Nancy Wake proved to be an exceptionally capable agent. She was praised for her accuracy with firearms, agility, and boundless energy. Training records described her as fierce, resilient, and a natural leader. However, not everyone in the organization was entirely impressed. Some reports criticized her for lacking discipline, highlighting incidents like showing up to training sessions intoxicated and frequently displaying a rebellious streak. Beyond mastering the use of rifles and pistols, Wake received extensive training in grenade handling, explosives, hand-to-hand combat, radio encryption, wireless communication, and nighttime parachuting. All of these skills were meant to prepare her for a highly dangerous mission, returning to occupied France. By the spring of 1944, tension was mounting inside Allied intelligence circles. It was clear that a massive Allied invasion of mainland Europe was imminent. The only unknowns were where and when it would happen. As part of the overall strategy, the role of the French resistance was critical: create as much chaos as possible behind enemy lines. Through sabotage of communication systems, demolition of key bridges, and disruption of German logistics and transportation, the resistance would force the Nazis to scatter their forces and lose coordination, setting the stage for a smoother and less deadly Allied landing. On a quiet night in April 1944, 3 secret parachutes drifted down into the rural countryside of southern France. One of them carried Nancy Wake, the legendary female agent of Britain's Special Operations Executive, SOE. Alongside 2 other agents, she formed a semi-autonomous team sent to France to assist the local resistance in organizing sabotage missions, managing logistics, and coordinating efforts in preparation for the Allied landings. During her fateful jump over the Auvergne region, Wake got tangled in a large tree, leaving her dangling dangerously in midair. Luckily, the first person to find her wasn't a German soldier, it was Henri Tardebat, a local resistance commander. Upon seeing her suspended above, he joked, "If only every tree in France grew such a beautiful fruit." Wake, unfazed and with her trademark sharp wit, shot back, "Cut the crap and get me down from this tree." Once safely on the ground, she wasted no time. With her team, she quickly set up a clandestine radio post and used wireless communication to make contact with London. They began receiving supply drops via parachute, distributing weapons, medicine, food, and equipment to hidden caches scattered across the region. The group launched sabotage operations targeting railways, ambushed German supply convoys, and gathered critical intelligence. As June approached and the Normandy invasion drew near, Wake joined thousands of French resistance fighters and SOE operatives in a massive coordinated assault on German logistical infrastructure. An estimated 7,000 resistance fighters took part in simultaneous attacks aimed at inflicting maximum damage. The German response was swift and brutal. They unleashed tanks, artillery, and bombers to crush the insurgency with overwhelming force. Under heavy pressure, Wake and her team were forced to retreat, scattering into the forest to avoid detection. Amid the chaos, Their radio operator had no choice but to destroy all communication equipment and codebooks to keep them from falling into enemy hands. With no functioning radio, the team was completely cut off from London, no orders, no supply drops, and no way to report their situation. Refusing to accept helplessness, Nancy Wake made a bold and unexpected move. She found an old bicycle and rode alone over 500 kilometers, roughly 310 miles, from their hideout in St. Santin to the nearest SOE radio station in Châteauroux. Over the course of 72 hours, Wake dodged German checkpoints, navigated treacherous terrain, and relied solely on her endurance and iron will. After delivering the emergency message and retrieving new communication codes, she pedaled all the way back, completing what would later be hailed as one of the most incredible solo feats of the war. Back on the front lines, Wake and her team resumed inflicting serious damage on the Nazi forces, sabotaging communication lines, blowing up viaducts, destroying fuel depots, and crippling logistics throughout the mountainous regions of southern France. One of her most notorious missions was a raid on a local Gestapo headquarters, which she personally led. The assault resulted in at least 38 German soldiers killed and the complete destruction of the command center. During the chaos, Wake killed a German soldier with her bare hands to prevent him from sounding the alarm, an act of cold, calculated courage in a life or death moment. Nancy Wake continued to fight until September 1944, when German forces began retreating from France. It was only then that her wartime role officially came to an end. After the war, the world recognized her extraordinary contributions with some of the highest honors from several nations: the Médaille de la Résistance and the Croix de Guerre from France, the George Medal from the United Kingdom, and the Medal of Freedom from the United States. In 1957, after years spent living in the shadow of wartime memories, Nancy Wake decided to begin a new chapter. She married an officer in the Royal Air Force, RAF, a man who shared her sense of duty and life experience. The couple settled in London, where Wake led a quiet, modest life for the decades that followed. Though she left the battlefield behind, Wake never faded from history. She became a living symbol of courage and defiance in modern warfare. Through reckless missions and narrow escapes, Wake carved her name into history, not with a pen, but with blood, sweat, and sacrifice. She lived to the age of 98, passing away in 2011, leaving behind an enduring legacy, especially for future generations of women, those who now believe that bravery knows no gender. When asked whether she had ever felt fear during her dangerous covert missions, Wake didn't offer a long explanation. Instead, she gave a short but unforgettable answer: "I wasn't afraid. I was too busy to be afraid." If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel.